Over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
You hear bear, right? And I've seen sun bears worked around them, seen them at accredited institutions.
What can they teach us?
And bile itself has a lot of different molecules in it, but bears in general produce this really unique molecule in their bile called ursodeoxycholic acid.
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
Welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris.
And I'm Angie.
So we're going back to Southeast Asia, and you picked this one.
Yes. We will be talking all about sun bears today.
Yeah, they're amazing.
A little difficult to pick which Asian bear to do because there's the sun bear, the Asiatic black bear, or the moon bear it's called, and then, of course, the infamous sloth bear, which is super darling. So hopefully throughout the years we'll get to cover them all. But yep, I had to pick the sun bear for this week, and there's besides amazing physiology and, of course, living in one of the most diverse places in the world, and they have an important role in the ecosystem. But there's a lot that's going on, too, about the illegal wildlife trade with Asian bears in general. And so we're going to talk about that today, which has been in the forefront of my mind personally for a long time, knowing about how Asian bears are often solicited for their bile. So we'll talk about that, which is it's one of these topics, Chris, to be honest with our listeners, is that I struggled wanting to talk about it and to be quite frank, Chris, it's taken me a while to want to cover the topic of bear bile farming and bear bile extraction in general, because in order for us to present it to our audience, that means I have to do a lot of research. We have to do a lot of research on it. And as we'll get through in probably about the middle of the podcast, it is about as horrific as it sounds. And so I've kind of been putting it off out of ignorance is bliss type mentality, which is wrong. I mean, I know that we're going to talk about that today, but we're going to talk about some really, of course, amazing physiological adaptations. The sun bear is the smallest in the bear family. It is the best climber. It's amazing. There's a lot of really, really cool things. And there's a lot of groups that are fighting for the bears. And we're going to focus on that towards the end of the podcast in sun bears in general. There's a great organization for the Borneo sun bear. And there's fantastic organizations that are working diligently, pouring their hearts into ending bear bile farming. So we're definitely going to end on some positive notes and get to talk about bears. And then the other thing too is if you stick with us, I really get to dork out on repro because there's still a lot we don't necessarily know about sun bear reproductive physiology. But what the studies are showing that their gestation length, so how long they're pregnant, on average is 95 days, but it can be up to 240 days.
That's such a wide swing. It's such a huge swing.
Yes, Chris. I liken it to the fact of, imagine you're a woman that's newly pregnant. You walk into the doctor's office in early January, all excited, and she's like, yes, everything's looking perfect. The baby's healthy. And you can expect this baby anytime around March through August.
Well, for us, 9 months or 2 years, sometime in there.
Right. Like what, so I had to do some deep dives into that to try to figure it out, and spoiler alert, researchers are still working on it, but we'll discuss why that is. And so, there's just, there's a lot to learn about these bears, and bears in general are super intelligent. The sun bear is no different. And I found some really cool studies that explores just how brilliant they are and clever. So,
it's just such a unique animal. It is obviously, has to be in the sites of conservation because it does have a very interesting conservation story. last week, when we did King Cobra, we're talking about Southeast Asia. So, we're going to highlight a little bit about that, but we covered it pretty well last week. So this week, it's a different type of, not only are they experiencing those pressures that, say, the king cobra is, or all the animals like the
habitat
gibbons,
loss,
right, orangutans, but now, like Angie's saying, with the bear bile, and I did a little bit on wet markets because that's obviously huge in the news through this coronavirus pandemic. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, of what's going on in that part of the world, to help our listeners understand, because this is part of it. Like the bear bile and bear parts, unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately, it's a huge part of their story, and that's why, like I said, it's taken us a little while longer than I would have liked to cover this topic, but we're here today. We're ready. We're prepared to tell their story, get everyone excited about Asian bear conservation, sun bears, Asiatic black bears, or moon bears. I love the name moon bears.
Yeah, I know.
Sun bears, moon bears, and sloth bears in general. Yep. But highlighting, of course, sun bears. And the other thing, too, that's just came across my news feed, because, yes, I'm a dork that follows all things like wildlife news, is, of course, we'll mention some good news. But I just read an article to put this in everybody's forefront, that with the coronavirus pandemic that's going on, there are people in China that are promoting bear bile as a coronavirus treatment. Yep. And wildlife advocates are up in arms about it.
No, just to jump in real quick, Angie, there is scientific evidence that bear bile itself is beneficial. And that's why I think kind of we were shy to talk about it, because you generally rhino horn, some of these other pangolin scales have no medicinal value. Bear bile actually does, but there are synthetics and alternatives that do the same thing. So you don't have to use bear bile. So we're going to talk about that, what the components are and what the research has shown. So
yes, and I'll try not to dork out about the actual molecule itself.
I know. I knew you would. Chemistry.
Yeah.
So really quick, just again, thank you to our listeners. We have seen such incredible growth the last month. We were on the front page of iTunes for a few weeks. So thank you to our new listeners that have subscribed to the podcast. We just ask that you please share, this knowledge, so we can keep growing this movement, this conservation movement, talking about these species week in, week out. And for those of you that do support us on Patreon, again, it's a cappuccino whenever that opens back up. A cappuccino a month, $5 a month minimum. You support us, our free education that we're doing, and now the kids podcast. So thanks to Jeremy and Laura, who both joined us this week on Patreon. Thank you so much. We're busy. We're interviewing kids. We're interviewing researchers, and we're trying to.
How fun is that? How fun is the kids?
It's fun. They're so cute. I love listening to it.
It gives me so much hope. Like I want to be a zoologist, or I want to be a farmer, or or a veterinarian, or a preschool teacher. Oh my gosh, Colleen this past week. It's hope, and that's going to be the generation that helps get us out of the mess that we've kind of gotten ourselves into. Yeah. So it's super fun.
Yeah, so we're staying busy. We're trying to push as much out as we can.
Well, and Chris, I know that a lot of people are going through economic hardships right now, too. So I always like to say, you don't have to do Patreon. Just a beautiful, glowing review on iTunes, 5 stars maybe, and then write a few words is all we need. And so I want to give a huge shout out this week to the Crown Lemur, who gave us a glowing review on iTunes and said our podcast is amazing, and they've taught them a lot, and it's just this person wants us to never stop. So Crown Lemur,
we'll keep going.
We will keep going for you and for all of our other fans out there. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's describe this thing. You see, you hear bear, right? And I've seen sun bears worked around them, seen them at accredited institutions, at zoos, but these aren't very big, are they?
No. They're slightly bigger than me. They say large dog size, about 150 pounds. I weigh much less than that. Wink, wink. Yeah. Not after this quarantine.
Jeez.
And I'm not sure what that is in kilograms. You're the
65.
There's
65.
there's my partner. 65 kilograms. And of course, bears are known to stand up on their hind legs when they're smelling the air or when they're foraging. And so when they do that, they only stand a meter?
About 5 feet. Yeah, 5 feet.
Meter and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, 1.4 meters. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not very much.
So definitely the smallest in the bear family, but arguably one of the most adoring.
They are. They're cute. They're so cute.
They're named the sun bear, also called the honey bear, because they're all black and they have this very sleek, almost shiny fur, but they have an orange-yellow horseshoe shape or U shape, very, very well-formed U, on their front of their chest. So in some folklores and folktales, this represents the rising sun. Mm-hmm. And this marking is so distinct, especially when they stand up. It's quite brilliant. And with that, they have a typical bear face. They have a wide, flat, short head, and then, of course, cute little small round ears. But their snout, their nose is also quite distinct where it's not black. It can be anywhere from orangish yellow, sometimes silver gray, depending on where exactly the bear lives. So it's and of course it has these big stocky paws and really long claws on this sun bear. 4 inches or 10 centimeters, I think.
Yeah.
And so just really, really impressive. And as far as their just giant black paws and, cute big round eyes. So they're just stunning.
You're skipping like one of the craziest things about them is they have this tongue that can be as long as 18 inches or 50 centimeters. It is crazy. It is like anteater. Yeah.
Well, and of course, going through some of the videos and photos in the beginning, most of the photos don't have that or videos. But then, then you find some where the photographers have been able to capture them either licking or sticking it out and trying to get food. And yes, it is so long. And
it's insane. It's nuts.
Not anteater because it's like obviously not that long.
Not long, but yeah.
But for a bear species, it's quite striking. Yes.
Yeah. And they do use it. They do use it kind of like an anteater. We'll get their nutrition. Why they have this long tongue.
John always teases me like when we're picking out a bottle of wine or something that I always buy it based on the label, not like on the flavor or vintage or any of that kind of stuff. And so I think with sun bears is the same thing. It's like that striking, gorgeous yellow orange U or V shape on their chest is just, I just stare at that. And then their cute little orange to brown colored nose. So
they're adorable.
Oh, they're so adorable. But in general, the bears the Asiatic bears that we opened up with, the Asiatic black bear, the moon bear, and the sloth bear also have somewhat of a similar chest marking, but distinct, of course, because they're different species. So the moon bears is going to be more lighter in color and not as prominent. It has it looks like a moon, like a setting moon, so much wider. And the sloth bear is just very distinct because although it has a U or a V-shaped orange chest marking, it has a whole bunch of hair, like fluffy, kind of a small little, a Pomeranian type dog, like fluffy ears. And so, but yeah, you can Google images, or Chris will probably put some on our show notes. But the sun bear has this very just tight, sleek fur. And it's probably a good time to talk about where they live, Chris, because one of the reasons they have such short, sleek fur is because of where they live.
Right. Southeast Asia, very similar to king cobra, maybe not as wide of a territory, but, you're talking from the eastern portion of India all the way down through Thailand, all the way down into Malaysia, parts of China. And that was their historic range. And looking at the data today, where they think they might be, and then where they definitely know where they are, this is one of the most fragmented species I think we've covered to date. It's a bunch of polka dots, where they think they are and where their territories or where they range now. It is very fragmented, and that is one of the biggest pressures that they have. But I mean, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Burma, Vietnam, that's where they are. But again, small areas because of human encroachment. I mean, it's just, that is what is going on in Southeast Asia. And, it's like we talked about last week with deforestation and everything going on there.
Yeah. And I think with sun bears too, we'll talk a lot about it when we get to behavior, but they are known, besides being the smallest of all the bears, they are known as the most arboreal. They live in trees. I mean, they are amazing climbers. Their bone structure, they almost all of their toes kind of toe inward, if you will, almost pigeon-toed, and both on the front legs and the hind legs. And researchers think that evolved, that skeletal structure evolved because they need to be such good climbers. That's like how they survive. And so this dense forest that they like to live in is really critical for them to have trees around. I mean, that's what they do. That makes a sun bear is a sun bear because it climbs trees and lives in trees. And we'll talk about a lot of that behavior. But so you get rid of this dense forest for agriculture or for urban life, and they're going to have a much harder time adapting to it because, well, they live in trees.
Yeah, I mean that's home, right? You just tear down their home and they have nowhere else to go.
Right. Like we think of our North American black bears or brown bears, and they climb trees and that's things like that, and they can knock them down and all this stuff, but they don't live in the trees.
Yeah. Yeah. Their diet, isn't dependent. So, and I mean, this is a keystone species. This is it, Angie and I, it always seems like a lot of these species we talk about is seed dispersal, but, not only do sun bears, they're critical with that, pest control, reading about how they, especially with this long tongue, but they excavate portions of the tree to make these holes and burrows and stuff in the trees that other animals use. I mean, they are, what they do in this tropical forest is so important for the nutrient cycle and the food web. It's heartbreaking to see what's going on there in that part of the world, to just see this all disappear in front of us.
Yes, Chris, a healthy forest ecosystem has sun bears, period. And those aren't my words. Those are words from a gentleman who has studied sun bears and dedicated his entire life to saving them. And we'll talk about Dr. Han Wang Su Te towards the end of the podcast, and we're going to highlight the Borneo Sun Bear Conservation Center. He's a wildlife biologist and ecologist by trade, so he knows what it takes to have a healthy forest ecosystem in Southeast Asia. And sun bears are a huge, huge part of it. And saying that they're a seed disperser is almost an understatement. In one study, researchers reported that in just one little sample of bear feces, which think of your dog, if you will, a large dog size, had over 309 seeds of different plant species. And there's certain plants that are most likely completely dependent on bears in general to disperse their seeds. So yes, without them, there'd be a lot lost.
And it's just when you think about the seed dispersal and how critical that is, because we've talked about this other species, when in the feces, it's almost like there's their nutrient pile for them to grow. And when you're talking about a tropical rainforest, the dense vegetation, the biodiversity of vegetation. So this is a species that is critical to maintaining that biodiversity, that complicated food web, everything. So when we start plucking these species out of the ecosystem, this is where it starts collapsing, and it's just crazy. And it's just like we talked about last week, this Southeast Asia is losing forests quicker than any other tropical region in the world. And I just saw a report today that nobody's even talking about. The fires are raging again in the Amazon. It's even worse than last year. That, they're clear cutting, clearing the forest in the Amazon. It's just we've got so much else going on in the world right now. That's not even on anybody's radar. But again, talking about the destruction of our tropical rainforest, it's just horrific. So not to hammer that point again, because we covered it pretty well last week, but I did want to go into wet markets because obviously that's in the news, and it's a lot of, every other day you're seeing something on the wet markets in China. Are they shut down? Are they not shut down? And here in the Western world, we all have these ideas of what a wet market is. So basically what a wet market is a farmer selling their products or produce. So it could be, vegetables or fruit, but can be meat or animals directly from their farms. And they're wet because usually the floors and stuff are washed down. The food's washed down, the fish is washed down, the veggies are washed down. So these markets are wet. There are dry markets too elsewhere, we can buy produce. Now, some of these, not all of them, but some of these, and that's a way of life for much of Asia. You're talking wet markets in China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore. Laos, it's their way of life. Mm-hmm. Laos, it's their way of life, right? Now, some of these sell either domestic animals like chickens or pigs, or wildlife like pangolins, or what we think this virus might have came from, the horseshoe bat, in this wet market in Wuhan. And so World Health Organization, other organizations are worried because this is a haven for viruses and spreading contagions. And this is just like what we're seeing with the coronavirus. The belief is it came from a wet market, like I said, from bats, possibly. That's where they kind of traced it. China reported 2 years ago that the exotic wildlife trade in wet markets in their country is worth $73 billion. I think it's in Asia, all of Asia, 73 billion. That's exotic wildlife. That is what we're faced with. I didn't realize it was that big.
I didn't either. Yeah,
that's insane. It's insane. So, that is what we're facing in trying to shut these down. That's why it's like China says, oh yeah, we're shutting them down, but they really don't get shut down because when it's not about the money, it's about the money. Going back to your dad's, old quote. So with these wet markets, tying it back to sun bears, they are kept in these markets, or parts of them are kept in these markets. Now, like we're going to talk about here in a second, bear bile is farmed there, but these bears are also kept in these markets where this bile is extracted. And looking at them in these cages in just horrific conditions and feces and just leak just totally unsanitary conditions for being in a market where people are buying food and all these other things. So that is what, I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist. It takes a virologist or, some of these smart people to go in and say, yeah, this is where SARS is coming from. This is where we're starting to see a lot of these deadly pathogens cross over into humans when you're keeping animals that close to the food source, and then also just around people. So that's kind of how coronavirus came about. So bear bile, Angie, like we said, it's been used in traditional Asian medicine for thousands of years. It does have benefits, but yes, we do have artificial sources. So
yes. So I think it's important just to hit the really quick facts about bear bile in case this is the first time you're hearing about it. And I hopefully will get through all of this without choking up. I definitely spent this past week losing it a few times when I was researching this. So really quick, what you need to know is bile. All mammals make bile. It's a digestive fluid produced by the liver, and then it's stored in your gallbladder. And it's really important. Bile helps you break down fats. And bile itself has a lot of different molecules in it, but bears in general produce this really unique molecule in their bile called ursodeoxycholic acid.
How can you could say stuff like that and I'm like flubbing everything? Yes, good job.
Well,
good job.
you do the Latin animal names, and I'll do the molecules. Well, because I had to say deoxyhexanoic acid, DHA. I don't even know if I'm saying it right now. I haven't given a talk about it in a couple years now. So, but anyways, but yeah, so it is a molecule, and if you notice in the name, it has urso, which I don't even think we gave the species name yet for the sun bear because we're just on a roll. Yeah. But bears are in the family Ursidae.
Yes.
In general, including the sun bear. So, I mean, it's a unique molecule, yes. And traditional Asian medicine uses it for treating liver and gallbladder conditions. And I didn't dive into if there was any evidence-based, like double-blind studies on if this stuff really works or not. But it has been used for a long time, to the fact where there's actually been synthetic versions of this molecule that will treat certain health conditions. So there's no need. I mean, I just took an oral steroid for a little wrist injury that I have, and it's cortisol, prednisone, and it's synthetically made, and it did exactly what it needed to do. They didn't have to collect the cortisol from an organism or anything, right? So the synthetic medicine is there for a reason, and it treats a lot of ailments. And as you mentioned too, Chris, there's other herbs and plants and things like that that can also treat liver and gallbladder issues, but still keeping under the umbrella of traditional Asian medicine. Right. So that's the background. But because of its value in traditional Chinese medicine, people have taken to the practice of farming bears, which is not a great practice because, as you can imagine, hard-hitting fact number 2 is that bear farming is probably about as cruel and painful as you imagine. So this is where, really quick, if you have kids listening or something, basically,
fast forward
the extraction of the bear bile from live bears is there's several different ways to do it, but you can insert a catheter, and then the bear lives in this tiny cage with a catheter. And this is not like something where the bear is euthanized. These bears, Chris and I will talk about a little bit more in their life cycle, but they live up to 20 years. And actually, I think record breaking was like 31 years. And so these bears are kept alive for as long as they can. And the second point about bear bile or bear bile farming is that traditionally the main bears that are used for the bile extraction process is going to be your Asiatic black bears, your moon bears, and your sun bears. So I think it's predominantly a lot more of the moon bears, but sun bears still fall into that category and are also used as well too. And what happened is, with this market for bear bile, people decided, instead of just killing bears in the wild and getting it one time or whatever it is, they started farming these bears. So where they take them as cubs or whatever, and then they put them in tiny cages and they extract bile from them. And there's several ways to do it. It can involve keeping a catheter in them 100% of the time. And it is as painful and as cruel as you probably are thinking. A really important note is sun bears and Asiatic black bears, they live a long time, 20 years. I think with sun bears, there's a record of a bear living to 31 years. They probably don't live that long under these bad conditions. But still, it's not like they're a livestock animal that's raised and then, slaughtered when they're a couple months old or something like that. Like they are, and they're not a domestic animal. They're not, I mean, obviously there's a lot of differences of how they're farmed. And so it's a very painful, unsanitary, unhealthy practice, as Chris mentioned, and they just keep collecting bile from these bears and then selling it. Okay, so that's like fact number 2. Fact number 3 is there's actually kind of a movement that people prefer wild bear bile to farmed bear bile. So, because I would almost be like, okay, well, if they're farming them, it's horrible. And obviously they need to have better welfare standards and they need to not live their life in this tiny, teeny, tiny cage. They're actually called crush cages a lot of the times to keep them still so they don't rip the catheter out and things like that. But I'm like, okay, at least they're leaving wild populations alone. Maybe that would be a bonus. Well, no, there's this belief that wild bear bile is more potent and more powerful, and it definitely fetches more money on the market, on the black market, than farm bear bile, because I guess they believe that it's more potent or whatever.
Right. Right.
So now the sun bears that are free and in the wild are also under attack of this issue. Mm-hmm. The other really important hard-hitting fact about bear bile farming is I was thinking, well, okay, maybe sometimes with like farmed exotic animals, we can at least learn about their reproductive biology better. Right? I think we see that maybe with farmed chinchillas or farmed minks. Like, I don't love it, but at least like the breeders have taught us a little bit more
learned about them.
Yeah, I can try to find some positive things to say. I like to obviously be open-minded. Well, bear farming has not helped us at all with trying to understand how to save these vulnerable. Remember, sun bears and moon bears and sloth bears are all vulnerable according to the IUCN, and their populations are very low. We don't even have counts on a lot of them. They can't breed these bears. The bears don't breed in these facilities. So they're having to continually collect them over time from the wild.
The wild, yeah.
And so it's not like a sustainable farming practice, if you will. I mean, not that, and so it's just, there's a lot of issues with it. And there hasn't been any evidence-based studies that have shown that farming bears actually enhances bear conservation. So those numbers don't exist. And so, but some other kind of important, or I guess good news, hard-hitting facts is that in general, people from China don't want bear bile farming.
Yeah, I read that. It was like 87% on a poll opposed to the cruel practices of bear bile farming.
Yeah. So
that's a lot. Yeah.
That's a fair number, because I think once people start learning more about it, and that's why I encourage you to share this podcast and things like that, they're like, ooh, geez, like, no, that's really, really not horrible in the bear's best interest. And so, but it's important to note too that it is still legal in China. Mm-hmm. And in Vietnam, it's not legal, but it still is happening a lot, of course, undercover or whatever. But Vietnam is working really hard. The Vietnamese government's working really hard to try to rescue and close every bear farming facility by 2020. And they're working with a group called Animals Asia, which I'll highlight towards the end of the podcast too. That's really just a fantastic organization that's just trying to end bear bile farming and working really hard at doing that. So it's just one of these things where I think there's been a surge in probably the last couple years as far as trying to end bear bile farming. And but then we get socked with the news. I mean, just was like a week or two ago, once again, that China is now saying, oh, bear bile and coronavirus, it's helping, or it might help, or something like that, with really no evidence, I mean, that I could find about that actually being true. Or even if it is, as we mentioned, there's several cruelty-free alternatives to reduce inflammation or to help with any liver or gallbladder issues. So there's just no need for it. And it sounds like a lot of people in Asia agree. It's just, once again, these black markets. And if there is a market for it, or there's these wet markets, it's going to keep happening. And it's
it's an important story for the Asiatic bears, and that's why you chose to talk about these animals. You're right. I mean, this has been heartbreaking, and when you do see, because with rhino horn, we go back to when we talked about the studies coming out of there. The people believe, oh, farmed rhino horn isn't as good as wild rhino horn, which is asinine or just insane in itself. Then you go into, synthetic rhino horn versus real. I mean, they'll reject it. Oh, it's not the same because they have this mystical belief. Same thing that you're saying with the bear bile. Yeah.
I mean, and you and I, of course, are hoof stock experts and rhinos. And so we've talked a lot about rhino horn poaching, and obviously there's no evidence of any medicinal purposes. And that's been a lot of our focus on the podcast with elephant and rhino poaching. But Chris, really thinking about it, and I was talking with my husband a lot about this over this past week. I don't know. I mean, this bear bile farming for me, it is just really, really horrific. I guess it's all horrible, like to kill an animal for one body part that's so ridiculous, whether it's a trophy or or for medicinal purposes that aren't even proven scientifically. But I guess, I mean, at least a rhino is like out running around and, enjoying itself and being a rhino, and then it dies hopefully quickly. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure, obviously, I've seen rhino orphanages where a lot of them have wounds and suffer. So I'm not promoting it, obviously, but there's just, to me, I obviously never really worked with carnivores, and I'm just starting to learn more about them through the podcast and really studying them. But this intelligent creature in a cage for 15 years, not with any other bears, no enrichment, no quality of life.
It's enough to drive 87% of the Chinese people polled to say, we don't want this.
Right.
And they put up with a lot in their culture that's accepted.
Correct.
Going to some of these wet markets and having animals slaughtered right in front of them to make sure the meat's fresh and stuff. So it says a lot of the cruelty of the practice. And like Angie said, Animals Asia Healing Without Harm program, which we're going to talk about, is leading an effort to do that. I did find some good news too with I think it's Kai Bao. It's the biggest single buyer of bear bile, that with the help of the government, they're actually pursuing alternative versions of this acid, because the market's drying up as far as the demand for actual real bear bile, that people are horrified enough. And just to give you some more hope too.
Well, unless it's touted as like a coronavirus thing. I mean, that's not helpful. But there's how many things are out there right now that will cure this horrific pandemic. Yeah, hopefully this one will pass quickly.
Yeah, but then Mike Veal, going back to Global Conservation Force, they're in Vietnam working with vet students and the young population to educate the older population on the truth of rhino horn and things like that. So there is a ground movement in that part of the world to end this. But yeah, it's sad. It's sad. Yeah. It's something we have to talk about. It's like, this is the species that we chose to really highlight this issue.
Yes. And like I said, towards the end of the podcast, we'll be highlighting a couple groups, and they'll be on our show notes, so you can learn more about the heroes that are protecting them in the wild and in their wild habitats, and then the heroes that are trying to rescue them from these farming facilities. So,
yeah. All right. The quick and dirty on bear evolution, specifically sun bear. Like Angie said, bears come from the family Ursidae. Sun bears are from the genus or genre Heleroctos, and the species name is Heleroctos melanus. Yeah.
Good job.
See, I get the words. Heleroctos malayanus. And there's actually two subspecies. So the Borneo sun bear and the Malayan sun bear. Mm-hmm. So the Borneo is Heleroctos malayanus urpillis, and then the other one's malayanus. So two subspecies of sun bear. Now, bears in general, so fun. I mean, we've covered polar bears, brown bears, or the grizzly bear, and now we're covering the sun bear. We did the panda bear too. We can't forget John's favorite. Mm-hmm. But there's three subfamilies of bears. So the panda has its own, out there.
They're special. We'll leave it at that.
Go back and listen to that episode. That's so much fun. So Ailuropodidae is them. The speck bear has its own. That was one we'll cover soon, probably the next year.
Yes.
That's probably the next bear we'll cover because they're special. And that's Tremartinae. And then the real bears are Ursinae. Mm-hmm. So the Ursinae is 6 species. So brown bears and polar bears, Asiatic black bears, American black bears, the sun bear, and then the sloth bear. Mm-hmm. So those are all Ursinae from there. Now, going way back, pandas split off 20-something million years ago to go be special. The speck bear about 12 million years ago split off to be special down there in South America. Mm-hmm. And then you have the 6. So then you have the sun bear, Asiatic black bear, and sloth bear, the moon bear, right? Mm-hmm. The moon bear is the Asiatic black bear.
Yes.
All kind of similar ancestry. Mm-hmm. So we do know that modern bears appeared in Eurasia about 5 million years ago. And then they migrated throughout Asia, then into North America, and then finally going down into South America. So there was actually bears living in Africa at one point, but not, obviously anymore. Now, Angie, there's so many bear ancestors that are fun to cover, but I just had to go back. I just love covering the big one. I don't know if you remember the big one, but it's Octotherium angustidens was the biggest bear ever. I just had to talk about it again really quick. That died out about 11,000 years ago. So weighed almost.
How big was it?
It was like 11 feet tall and weighed like 4,000 pounds.
Oh,
that's huge,
massive.
Yeah, South America had some huge animals.
They sure did.
Massive. Yeah, it's insane.
Titanoboa.
They had some big animals. So yeah, that one was down there, and obviously the sun bears is the smallest.
Right? Wasn't that one of the biggest dinosaurs?
The dinosaurs found down there. Yeah, it was fun. But the sun bears is obviously the smallest bear, and that we've had when it has the shortest fur. They, like Angie said, their physiology is just really different from other bears. I mean, she talked a lot about the paws turning inward. Their chests are flatter. So, they just are, like you said, they're almost, koalas aren't real bears. We know that. Mm-hmm. But see how, I think of them climbing in the trees. I think of koala bears, like going up there, just right, climbing up those trees. And then just a couple differences too, not only they developed, these, this chest and claws to climb the trees. They have that super long tongue, which is used to, when they're breaking up some of the tree, to reach in there and get insects. We're going to talk about nutrition here in a second. Also bees to get to honey. Mm-hmm. It's almost like
they're also called the honey bear too. Yeah.
Yeah, they love it. They love it. And, it's just, and their teeth compared to other bears are much flatter. So even though they're omnivores, they tend to really have a vegetation diet. Mm-hmm. That is where they evolved. And it's just, from much different from the Asiatic black bears.
Yeah. And one of the more recent studies showed that about 50% of their diet is from fruit. So all the different types of fruit from trees, and a lot of them that I can't even pronounce, different species. And because they're in the tropics, there's some seasonality to some of the fruits, but usually there's always fruit that they can find, where when we think of our North American black bear, they're going to only be able to have berries in the summertime, right? Because it's cold for the winter. And so, yeah, I think they're definitely fruit dependent, and that's why they're such a good seed disperser too, of course. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as you mentioned, they're I love this description. I actually had to call John into the room. I'm like, John,
yeah,
I love this. Sun bears are considered opportunistic omnivores. And I like that. I don't know.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
The O's and the O's. But yeah, they will do what they need to do. And they can eat small rodents and birds and lizards. Yeah. They'll scavenge kills from tigers if they have to. And because they are smart and they are opportunistic omnivores, they can sometimes get into people's rubbish, which we know we have that issue with our bears here in North America as well. So it's, they're smart. They know how to eat, and they will eat what they need to eat. But a large part of their diet is fruit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? In an ideal world where there's tons of trees, right? So they want to stay up in the trees eating the fruit. That's their goal. But of course, they'll come down the trees and be opportunistic.
Yep. Now, Angie, I have a question for you here in a second.
Quiz time. Let's see.
Okay, so
I've got my morning coffee. Hold on, let me take a drink of it first.
Okay. So not a ton of predators for them. I mean, tigers they are the main predator of some bears. And, so they do have to worry about tigers. Generally not. The cubs, you do have snakes and larger birds of prey that can take the younger sun bears. Now, they have a particular adaptation from another species that we've covered before, where their neck, they have really loose skin. So they have thick hides, but loose skin. So if a predator does grab them, they can actually turn to bite back.
Nice.
So my question is, do you remember what species can do this?
Well, Chris, I've had my morning coffee, and I if I do say so myself, I'm pretty sharp today. So
yeah.
Oh yeah, Chris. Honey badger don't care. Honey badger will twist out of any predator.
Oh God.
Honey badger don't care. Yeah.
Oh, I love my honey badger. Yep.
Honey badger.
I just started laughing. I was just like, oh, honey badger, I'll never forget you.
Well, now we got honey bear or sun bears that can pull off the same ninja move. I love it.
Yeah. So it's one way they can escape predators.
For sure.
Now, today is Mother's Day, so I know these are pretty good mamas, right?
We're going to get to all about sun bear parenting here in a second. But in general, sun bears aren't very social. Really, the biggest bonds are going to be between a mother and her cub. And so, in general, they're solitary. They're going to be active at night, but there's also reports of them being active during the day as well. Sun bear activity is going to depend on where they live. There's reports of them being active during the day, and then there's also reports of them being active nocturnally in areas that are frequently inhabited by humans. So they don't really want to be around humans because they're shy, and so that might make them be more nocturnal. So the research is still ongoing in that regards, but what they are spending their time doing, we know, is climbing. They're the most arboreal or tree loving and living of all the bears. So in fact, they sleep and sunbathe in trees at heights anywhere from like 2 to 7 meters. So they're up there. Wow. It's not just like a fallen log or something. And what I found super fascinating, I just loved, I remember this when we covered orangutans, but their bedding sites are often in tree cavities or hollows, kind of like you mentioned, they will excavate that out. But they will also build bedding or nests high up in the trees, like a chimpanzee will or an orangutan. And they'd like they'll break all these branches to make platforms high up in the trees to rest on. And these bedding sites actually help researchers identify where they live because they're very elusive and secretive bear because they spend a lot of time in the trees and there's not a lot of them. So I just found it really fascinating how they will just hang out up in trees and make their own little comfy bed. I remember that fact from orangutans. I love that. So they know how to be comfortable, which is awesome. And they can swim as well. They're decent swimmers, but I mean, they're typically not trying to swim. What's really interesting and separates them from a lot of bear species is that they do not go through a period of hibernation. So when we think of the American black bear, the European black bear, they'll go through a dormancy period or a hibernation period where they live off their fat reserves and stop eating for the most part. And that does not happen with sun bears. Sun bears are active year round, and this is presumably because they live in tropical areas where they have their food sources present year round. So I thought that was pretty cool. And once again, that's why there's not very many bear species to begin with. What'd you say? There's 7 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
8?
Well, yeah, I mean, 6 that are true bears,
6 true
right?
bears, and then 2
right,
if you count.
And then you have your spec bear and your panda.
Right. So there aren't that many bear species, which is why we need to conserve the ones we have. Absolutely. I mean, they're incredibly important for the ecosystems. But it just goes to show how unique they are from other bear species. They climb, they don't hibernate, they eat a ton of fruit. They're darling. All bears are cute though. So. But another thing that's really important to know about sun bears, Chris, is that they're pretty shy and reclusive. They're not known to attack humans, even if they're provoked. Of course, a mom sun bear and a cub might be, it's going to be a little bit more aggressive. But yeah, just in general, they're definitely most likely more scared of us than we are of them. And there's anecdotal stories out there about how sun bears can be pests in agricultural, like in the palm field or coconut oil plantations. But I found an interesting study, which is why I love research, from 2019, published in the journal Oryx. And the title is, Does the Vulnerable Sun Bear Damage Crops and Threaten People in Oil Palm Plantations? And this researcher went through and interviewed a lot of palm plantation workers and farmers in regions of Sabah, in several regions of Borneo, and basically found that no, they're not an issue. In fact,
right,
pigs and elephants were much more destructive to their habitats.
No, it's interesting because I didn't see much on anything with sun bears on human conflict. And even we know the research here with bears in North America or in any other parts of the world, human wildlife conflicts. I mean, bears generally are very shy and run away from people. It's the rare oddity that, a bear will kill somebody or there'll be a conflict. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think there's a lot of misnomers about that. And that's why I love science, to kind of come in there and see what the issues are and then work towards them. But of course, we always need education on what to do if you do have a bear on your property, or obviously not leaving your trash out, right? Like if the forests are dwindling and then they're forced to come out of the trees and come encroaching on humans, which happens here in the States a lot, then you want to help the situation out by not encouraging them to come near you and things like that.
Well, it just shows you too how smart they are, right? I mean,
they're opportunistic. Exactly, Chris. Like they're nobody's fool. They of course, amongst themselves, they have a great sense of communication. They have a brilliant sense of smell, and that's where they'll stand up and, of course, sniff the air and search for food items, right? And of course, they use their olfactory senses to look for mates. And they do have vocalizations, but they're more known for their grunts and snuffles. And they do have a roar, but it's not probably as powerful or as aggressive as what we're used to with our North American black bears and brown bears. But they can also sometimes make barking sounds too, if you will, if they're surprised. And so, speaking of sun bear intelligence, Chris, is really cool. There's a couple anecdotal stories out there that I was able to find, and then, of course, one study. But one of the stories was about this bear that was under human care, and it was fed rice a lot. And so what it did is it actually didn't eat the rice. It scattered the rice throughout its enclosure to attract chickens, and then it killed and ate the chicken.
Jeez. Okay.
So, and that wasn't a study; that was anecdotal. But I thought that was pretty great. Yeah. But another fun story, once again, I would have to source it, but was that sun bears have been known to use their claws as a key to unlock a cupboard that has sweet food in it. So, to be able to have that dexterity and be able to manipulate that. But turning to the literature, because of course that's what I usually do, I found a great study out of Atlanta, Georgia, about using computerized testing on sun bears. that live under human care at Zoo Atlanta. And Bonnie Perdue is the author, and it was published in Behavioral Sciences just recently, I think in 2019. And what she did is she was able to, her and her colleagues were able to train sun bears to use a computer touch screen to work on object discrimination. So that's being able to tell different objects apart from each other on a computer screen. And so it's all free choice. And they found the bears, once they were trained on how to use the computer, that they used it readily and that they enjoyed it. They, of course, positive reinforcement was applied, treats and all that to encourage the bears. And they found that the bears really enjoyed this. It was great enrichment, and they really excelled at the tasks that they were asked to do. And in a really cool note, do you know how they use the touch screen? How do you think they use the touch screen?
I want to say nose, but are you going to say they use their claw?
No,
their tongue?
Yes.
Oh, that long tongue? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So obviously their tongue is very
cool.
Dexterous or agile.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was a really cool study. They know bears are smart, but just getting them to apply it in a way that they can communicate with us humans. And that was found it was great enrichment for the sun bears there at Zoo Atlanta. So kudos to those researchers for putting some scientific based evidence out there. I mean, we know they're smart, but just showing how smart they are and how much they enjoy interacting and using their brains. And once again, moving back to bear bile farming, of why bears are super intelligent, and they need stimulation. They're omnivores, so they're used to collecting food and doing all this stuff, and they need to stay busy. Otherwise, I'm sure they probably go crazy. So, So, but pretty cool stuff. And then looking into their reproductive physiology, as I opened with about their very sporadic, either short to long gestation period. I had to dive into the literature with that. But what was really surprising, Chris, in general, is there is not that much is known about breeding behavior in sun bears.
Yeah.
Here we are. We're talking about 6 true species of bears. They're super unique, and there's so much is unknown about them. And a lot of that is because they're elusive. There's not a lot of them left, and they're pretty elusive in the wild. So there are researchers that are studying them. And I found a really cool paper out of your old stomping grounds, Therogenealogy.
Okay, yeah.
You've published in there several times.
A few times, yeah.
Yep. A study out of 2004 that looked at both sun bears living under human care and then, of course, wild sun bears collecting feces. So the title of the study is Fecal Steroid Analysis for Monitoring Reproduction in the Sun Bear. So fecal steroids, they looked at hormone levels in the bear feces, both under human care and then from wild sun bears. And they're basically able to elucidate that sun bears are polyestrous, so they have several estrus cycles, but they're non-seasonal breeders, which is really unique because when we think of bears in the northern hemisphere, the American black bear, brown bear, polar bears, sloth bears, pandas, all of that, they're seasonal breeders, and their babies are born in the springtime so they can have all the food. So the sun bear is much different in that they can have a baby year round. And research speculate that is because they have food availability. They don't hibernate. Their food is plentiful, assuming there's forests around. So a much different strategy. The researchers, this is why we need more researchers out there, calling all researchers that love to study this stuff.
Please.
They don't know a lot about sun bear ovulation, whether they're induced ovulators. So do they need to breed to ovulate, or are they spontaneous ovulators and they just ovulate every so often like humans do? They don't know that. And they also don't know if sun bears have delayed implantation, which I know we talked about in other bear species, where the egg and sperm will fertilize, the embryo grows to a certain stage, and then it basically like a pause button is hit for a while. And then a couple months later, it'll resume growing. And researchers believe a lot of that has to do with seasonality, timing it to seasons so that the babies are born in the spring when all the nutrients are around. And there's still a lot about delayed implantation that we don't researchers fully don't understand.
Yeah.
But the sun bear, Chris, but that's why when we look at sun bear gestation length, how long they're pregnant, it's anywhere from 95 to 240 days. And so it's just really all over the map because it depends on if they're under human care. It depends on if they're wild. There's really a lot of unknowns about it, where other bears, such as the polar bear or the brown bear, they also have a range, for instance. So a polar bear's gestation period is 151 to 300 days, which is still if I was a woman, if that was me, I'd be a little bit annoyed about that.
Right. Yeah.
Because us humans are like give or take us a week. And any of my fellow female mothers out there that have been pregnant, those last couple weeks, you are like counting the days to like, okay, when's the big show gonna happen? Because we need to know.
Mm-hmm.
It's time.
Mm-hmm.
So polar bears, 151 to 301 days, a brown bear, 190 to 260. But we know a little bit more with those guys. But with sun bears, it's just still this wide range of 95 to 240 days. And so it's just incredible that we don't know more about their reproductive physiology, and especially considering that some of them are farmed. I mean,
well, they're not, but they're not breeding them though.
Well, that's
right?
what I'm saying. They haven't figured out how to breed them. They're not breeding them. They don't know how to. I mean, so it's just like, there's just still a lot of unknowns, and they deserve our attention before they're extinct. I mean, this is why we need to know more about them. So they have been successfully bred in zoos, but it's still a work in progress. They're still learning about it. And then interestingly enough, at a Berlin zoo, a sun bear actually gave birth 2 times in 1 year. So her cycle was booking, right? Like, so she, and they don't really, I mean, that would be great if we could reproduce that more often under human care for their genetics and for the species survival plan. But at accredited institutions, but there's just still a lot we don't know. Usually when a female gives birth, a litter size is 1, maybe 2. And pretty typical to most bear species. Sun bears are the newborns, cubs they're born blind, hairless, and helpless, teeny tiny, 300 grams. And their eyes will open at about 25 days, and they'll really start to see after about 50 days, and their hearing improves after 50 days. They start moving around and walking after that, and they stick with mama for a long time. So the sun bear mama is an amazing mama. She puts a lot of energy into raising these helpless young, and then into teaching them how to be opportunistic omnivores, and how to climb, and how to forage, and how to find the foods that they need to find. And so a cub will stay with a mom up to 3 years. 3 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time. Exactly. It's a big investment. And of course, a mother sun bear will protect her young more aggressively than obviously if she didn't have the young. And the cubs will become adults and reach their sexual maturity anywhere from 2 to 4 years of age. So usually once they leave mom, they can start to reproduce if they find a mate and things like that. But the one thing I did find that I thought was kind of cool about their behavior is that researchers think that the beautiful V on their neck, the orange colored V or U shape on their chest, actually potentially serves an evolutionary purpose to make them look bigger when they're like standing up and trying to either defend their territory or if 2 males are about to battle, that maybe makes them look more impressive. But of course we don't know the answer. But we do know that it's that patternation color on their chest is a really cool adaptation that the sun bear, moon bear, and sloth bear all have. So that it must play some kind of role in communicating something or mate attraction or something.
They're ancient, and that they kept it, through some way, the coloration pattern. Well, you're right. There's a lot of unknown with this species that we need to know more, especially as they head towards extinction. I mean, they're vulnerable now by the IUCN. They know their population's decreasing, but again, we don't have total numbers, and I couldn't find anywhere of a estimate on the population. It can't be huge, considering how fragmented they are.
Yeah, I felt like maybe 1,000, but once again, they don't know because it's so hard to do the count and the populations are so fragmented. So I have no idea if that number wasn't
different
really
countries
confirmed by any study that I could find.
Yeah, and it's just, like I said, earlier, it's deforestation. They're losing their habitat for palm oil, other things there. So like last week I said, if you could use the palm oil apps, depending on where you live, that, we're trying to find sustainable palm oil, even though as we try to push to eliminate palm oil overall. But this week, I brought this up before, Ange. Mm-hmm. Before we jump to the organization real quick. And that's just, with deforestation, I'm thinking of sustainable wood. Mm-hmm. And today, the best thing we have is FSC certification, which is the Forest Stewardship Council. Okay. And it's a global effort. It has come under criticism, but it is the best thing we have going today. And when it does work, it is certifying sustainable wood, where these companies or whoever is out there taking wood is regrowing the habitat. And, it's with the huge human population, wood is a major resource for us. So forests are going to get chopped down. I mean, it just is. It's happening. So if we can at least be sustainable, go into these areas where we have chopped down trees, replant them, rehabilitate the ecosystem. That's the best thing we have right now. So look for FSC certification when you buy wood products. And then I always go back to bamboo. Bamboo is a great resource. I know it's got some issues on its own, but you can buy bamboo wood products. Bamboo grows really quickly, and you can get a lot of use out of it. So anyways, look for that FSC certification. But I know you were saying, a couple of the groups that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So I want to just quick highlight 2 groups, and we'll have a lot more about them on our show notes as well. But the first one is specifically based on sun bears, and that's going to be the Borneo Sun Bear Conservation Center. This is an amazing rehabilitation center founded by Wang Si Tay that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. He's an individual that has studied sun bears his whole life, their ecology, their behavior, and of course, understanding that they need to be saved. And so the Borneo Sun Bear Conservation Center works to rescue bears from poor condition. And then they are also highly involved in educating the public about sun bear conservation and other issues, threats facing sun bears. And they work with research too, because they have a huge facility where basically the bears get to be bears for the first time in their life. They're rescued from these horrible conditions, and they get to climb trees and just live in this. They have several hectares of preserve where bears just get to be bears. And then, of course, they also work closely with researchers to learn more about their behavior and more about their conservation. And the Borneo Sun Bear Conservation Center is also works largely in part with the species survival plan with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums to help initiate international breeding programs to help save the species. So a huge thank you to the Borneo Sun Bear Conservation Center for all the work they can do. There's tons of stuff online about them. They have a great Facebook presence and a website that's beautiful, and you can learn more about all the specific projects that they do to help rescue sun bears and also help conserve them and to help educate people about how awesome they are. So it's a great group dedicated to sun bears, and check them out. And the second organization I want to highlight is Animals Asia. And so they can be found at animalsasia.org. If you've been listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what can I do to help end bear bile farming. And I just need to know more about this because it needs to stop. I want to help it stop, or I want to help organizations that are helping to stop it. And the founder of Animal Asia, Jill Robinson, released a documentary in 2017 I highly recommend, called The Moon and Back documentary. It's all about bear bile farming and trying to learn more about how to stop that. So Animals Asia is devoted 100% to basically stopping the horrific bile farming. And then, of course, working with the welfare of animals across Asia. So check that group out. Of course, they have a beautiful webpage with tons of information, and then you can like them on Facebook or other social media platforms as well. So thank you to Jill Robinson and her group for all they do.
Yeah, no, it's always heartening when there are people out there week in, week out, besides hippos and raccoon dogs, almost every other animal we've covered, there's people out there fighting for them and ensuring their survival and well-being and learning as much as we can about them. So thank you so much to them. It's one of the things I love about this podcast are these agencies working so hard out there, and then we get to speak to them.
Yes, I'm definitely going to reach out and try to have some of these experts that know the details a lot more about sun bears and moon bears and some of their conservation issues. I would love to hear what they have to say so they can keep us the most up to date, right, of what's happening with the scientific literature and what's happening from the political side of things, so that we can help steer our listeners in the right direction of what we can do. Because there's a lot, even though we're all on our couches right now,
I know,
at home, there still is a lot that we can do. And part of it is by sharing and helping educate people, because it's a touchy topic about bile farming, but it's one that I think not everybody's familiar with. And the more you know, don't be like me, don't stick your head in the sand. And trust me, as much as ignorance can be blissful, don't stick your head in the sand. Let's learn together about some of these really hard issues that animals are facing and some of these welfare issues, and we can work together towards saving them.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And, share this with a friend. Thank you for the subscriptions, people subscribing to the podcast and rating us and reviewing us. So thank you so much. And again, we're just going to keep working hard. Look for kids episodes coming. We've got some interviews planned, and we'll be back next week with a new species.
Thank you, everyone.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.